Okay, this video is going to go through the investigation you guys did on your own when you're using the colored pencils and you were seeing the transformations of different functions that we talked about. So we're just going to kind of summarize the information that we learned. I'm going to put today's date. Today is the 15th. I'm sorry, today is the 14th. And this is transformations of parent functions. So on the last 2 days of class, we worked on transforming these functions. So we're going to take a look and just kind of summarize the information that we found. So we're going to look at different functions throughout this activity because remember these rules apply to each of the function families that we talked about. So the first function family that you looked at was linear, and then quadratic, and then absolute value and square root. So those are the four types that we've studied so far. So one of the translations or transformations that we talked about was just shifting the graph. And shifting the graph, we could move it up, down, left, or right. So to move it up, I think we figured out that whatever the function was, if you added a number, it would shift it up. So let's take a look at an example. Here's our parent function, f of x equals x squared. That's already graphed for us, so that's the parent function. Let's say I wanted the graph of f of x equals x squared plus 3. I think we know or remember from our investigation. I'm just going to do this on the Desmos activity up here as well. I'm going to type in the function. So I've got f of x equals x squared there's the parent function. I'm going to now do the transformation by adding 3. So what I can see is that my parent function shifted up 3. So now I'm going to draw in the new transformation with the U shape at plus 3. And I'm only going to draw what I can see on the graph. So I know that U shape just went up 3 units. So translation up is when you're adding. So if you have this plus some value, so they're using k as the value, that's going to shift your graph to go up. When we went down, it was just the opposite, and here we're looking at the absolute value function this time. And here we're subtracting a value. So if I show you guys that again in your calculators, let me get the absolute value function here. So I got to click on absolute value of x. There it is. And now I want the absolute value of x. And this time, if you notice, the plus 3 automatically moved it up 3. Let's say I moved it down 4, so I'm going to do subtract 4. So here I can see the parent function, the red one, and it shifts down 4 units to the new one. So when you put a minus sign on the outside there, it shifts it down 4 units. So in our notes, we'll make our new equation, f of x equals the absolute value of x minus 4. And I can draw my graph here. Shifting down. So adding shifted up, subtracting shifted it down. Alright, the trickier units are when you're moving left or right. So when you're moving left or right, you're looking at something that's going on inside of parentheses, underneath the square root, or inside of the absolute value bars. So for example, Here we have a translation that we're going to say is moving right. So I have the square root of x as the function. That's my parent function. So to translate it to the right, or shift it to the right, I have to include, let's move it 4 units to the right. I'm going to do absolute value, square root of x minus 4. Notice the minus 4 is underneath the square root. There is a difference when it's outside of the square root. Then it would just be moving it up or down. So let me type that into my graph. Let's see what we get. We get the square root of x. There's the parent function. Now I'm going to do the square root of x minus 4. And take a look at what happens. This one, even though it's minus, so minus you would think, oh, it's going to go to the left. It's actually the opposite. It moves to the right. So when it's underneath the radical or inside of parentheses or inside the absolute value bar and it's minus 4, it actually moves it to the right. So this graph got shifted 4 to the right. So I can graph that on my sheet. And actually I'm not going to be able to see that much. So I'm going to kind of extend it off of the graph there. So in this case, the graph shifted to the right with a minus sign underneath the square root sign. And then our last two examples, we're going to shift to the left, and this time we're going to look at the square root function, or the quadratic function. So to shift a parent function to the left, inside of the brackets or inside of the parentheses or underneath the square root, you're going to have a plus sign. You're going to add a value on the inside. So here we're looking at our parent function, which is the quadratic. The new one, we're going to shift it, and we'll do the same thing. This time I'm going to do x plus 4 squared. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So on my graph, I'm going to do x squared again. And this time I'm going to do parentheses. Oop. Get rid of that one. Parentheses. X squared. And this time we're doing plus 4. But I put the squared in the wrong spot, so I got to delete that. That's actually supposed to be on the outside. So notice, now this one's green, I started here with my red one, and when I put plus 4 inside and then squared it, it shifts it to the right, to the left 4 spaces. So adding 4 goes to the left 4 spaces. So I can draw a picture of my graph. I'm moving the U to the 4 there. I kind of had to draw off the graph, but it moved 4 to the left. Okay, so the last type of transformation you're going to see is when you reflect it over the x-axis. There are other transformations. These are the 5 important ones that you want to know. So here again we have the absolute value function. This time, to flip it over or to reflect it, we're just going to put a negative in the front. So my new equation here is going to be f of x equals the opposite of the absolute value. So let's take a look at what happens when you do that. So I'm going to go to my graph. I'm going to type in absolute value again, x. There's the absolute value of x. For my second one, I'm going to do the opposite of the absolute value of x. So take a look at what happened. This one essentially just flipped from the red, just flips over on top of the green. So that's the reflection you're going to see in the graph. So here in my picture, all I'm doing is drawing an upside down absolute value function. So now it looks like a giant X in my graph. So to summarize, and I'll make this bigger so we can see this more clearly. To shift up, you add on the outside. To shift down, you subtract on the outside. To shift or move right, you subtract on the inside. To shift left, you add on the inside. And when I say inside, I mean inside of the parentheses for the quadratic, inside of the square root for the square root, and inside of the brackets for the absolute value. And then to flip or reflect, I'll say reflect over the x-axis. A negative goes in front of equation. So the negative in front of the equation flips it upside down. So those are the 5 key transformations that we investigated and that you're going to need to know for Algebra 2. Okay, so hopefully these notes will help you when we get to those practice problems on Monday.